that the numbers of people living in extreme poverty in LDCs could rise by another 32 million. The events and processes which have unfolded in LDCs since the spread of this pandemic have clearly to us highlighted that productive capacity needs to be the center of any recovery plan. And productive capacity have a crucial role to play, not only in the short run response to the global COVID crisis, but also, and more critically so, to the immediate and to the long term. And my colleague Rolf Traeger will focus on the findings of the UNCTAD Least Developed Countries report, which is, as you may know, is one of the UN's longest standing analytical reports that focus entirely on LDCs, challenges and policy recommendations. And the first edition, if you for your information, came out in 1984. We are also very grateful for His Excellency, the President of Malawi, who gave a foreword for this report, which you will hear. This year's report also contains very much the results of systematic research carried out on using the Productive Capacity Index that the Ambassador mentioned. And this index covers countries, 193 countries, and is composed of 46 indicators across 8 categories of productive capacity. On top of its relevance for research, the Productive Capacity Index can be used in many other ways, including benchmarking the country's performance in the development of the productive capacity, and also as a tool to analyze the capability of countries to achieve their development goals. And I will ask my colleague Musi Deleleng to make a presentation on the PCI and its multiple uses, as he was the team leader for that. Now, UNCTAD's engagement in LDCs is not only restricted to research and policy work that I've described, but we are also accompanying graduating countries in the evaluation of their vulnerabilities and in the preparation of their smooth transition strategies aimed at enabling graduation with momentum. And last year, we launched a new generation of vulnerability profiles, which are organized around 4 pillars, namely the situation analysis and identification of key areas of vulnerability, an evaluation of the consequences of identified vulnerability, and lastly, the identification of structures and features of the economy that are critical for sustainable graduation and for reducing existing vulnerabilities. This new generation of vulnerability profiles is also forward-looking, as the key vulnerabilities identified in our studies will serve as a foundation and bedrock for the formulation of tailored national strategies to support graduation with momentum. Now, whilst the Istanbul Programme of Action for the decade 2011-2021 proposed wide-ranging assistance, as we're all aware of, the reality is for many LDCs has unfortunately fallen far short of its ambitious targets. It is also worthwhile recalling and noting that the importance of productive capacity has already been recognized by LDCs and their development partners in the current program of action. The consensus language agreed in the IPOA also suggests LDCs themselves acknowledge the cross-sectoral, integrated and cross-cutting nature of productive capacities and the positive impact that it can have across the national economy, including poverty reduction, job creation, graduation, and structural transformation. You will also recall, which is important, is that the Committee for Development Policy has recommended to ECOSOC that the program of action for LDC 5 for the next decade adopt the theme expanding productive capacity for sustainable development as its organizing framework. And this is critical. And UNCTAD fully supports this recommendation and stands ready to support the preparative process and to support member states in achieving this goal. This new program of action, which is to be developed, could, as far as we see it, UNCTAD, could be structured around as an integrated productive capacity centered framework for LDCs and be based around 9 interrelated pillars, and these pillars involve significant paradigm shift in economic development governance, institutions, macroeconomic and financial policies, sectoral policies, social policies, regulations, as well as cross-cutting policies, infrastructure development, private sector development, enhanced cooperation, and of significant importance is also an enhanced effectiveness of the international support mechanism. It is worth also recalling that since UNCTAD, LDC4 conference in 2011, only 4 countries have graduated. And although 11 are in the pipeline, only 4 countries graduated. It makes for us to sit back and consider why that's the situation. And within the next decade, if things go as business as usual, for all but 3 Asian Pacific LDCs would have graduated out of this LDC category. And this means that the LDC category would soon become primarily an African issue. And this should be troubling sign for African countries and the international community as a whole. Now, this new plan of action for LDCs should therefore be crafted to support the specific needs of these countries. Now, UNCTAD is working towards building productive capacities in LDCs and in Africa, including through the use of trade, investment, finance, and technology as all vehicles for inclusive and sustainable growth and development. Furthermore, UNCTAD is working on a new generation of smooth transition strategy as a long-term development strategy for developing productive capacities for graduating countries. In the long term, how a country graduates is as important as when it graduates. And the only way graduating countries can catch up with other developing countries and achieve sustainable development is if they graduate with momentum. And to achieve this, countries have to develop their productive capacities. Lastly, Mr. Ambassador and distinguished delegates, I just would like to bring to the attention of this distinguished gathering here now the conclusions of the 70th executive session of the Trade and Development Board, which was held on the 5th February 2021, which I quote, welcomes the proposal to adopt productive capacities as the framework for the new program of action for LDCs, expected to be adopted during the 5th United Nations Conference on Least Developed Countries, and of course calls upon UNCTAD to contribute to the preparatory process of LDC5. And this is nothing new, as it falls definitely within UNCTAD's long-standing history and support for LDCs. You may be aware that UNCTAD was instrumental in raising the issue and the creation of the category of LDCs some 50 years ago. Now I'd like to swiftly move forward to my colleague, Musi Jaleleng, who will give us a brief presentation on the PCI. Musi, you have the floor.
Musi, you are muted.
Musi, you are muted. Unmute, please.
Anyway, you hear me now?
We hear you. Please go ahead.
And you can see the presentation as well.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. So I will quickly take you through the index, but with the focus on only on LDCs. So basically, what we are going to share with you has actually, just simply for the sake of structuring the thought, I will provide you what productive capacities are as conceptualized in earlier words. I will show you the categories and the performance of LDCs. And then we also show you the progress that LDCs, those graduated earlier, and those who are recommended to graduate, progressed on the index. And finally, I will try to provide you with key messages and concluding remarks as home take as we prepare for the conference. Please, for all the information and resources, the manuals and analytical reports and the entire data set, kindly visit the website, which is a dedicated domain on the UNCTAD webpage, which you see on the screen. Now, when we talk of productive capacities, actually, we have been saying this for many years. It has the foundational basis as defined as productive resources, entrepreneurial capabilities, and production linkages, which together determine the capacities of countries to grow and develop. But related to productive capacities is also the structural economic transformation, for which productive capacity is the foundation, which basically means transforming the productive resources, labor and technology, capital, and other resources that the economy has from low productivity activities to high productivity activities. Basically, productive capacities helps to nations to kickstart the process of structural transformation, whereby the structural transformation itself feeds back to the productive capacities of nations. Now, the three pillars, the main conceptualization of productive capacities, for the sake of the exercise, are further broken into 8 categories, which we call them pillars or categories of productive capacities. As you can see, these are natural capital, institutions, structural change, human capital, energy, private sector, ICT, transport, and there is also an institution which you don't see on the screen. So these are how we map the productive capacities index. As the director was saying, this forms the basis for the identification of 46 indicators for 193 economies. Now, not surprisingly, of course, on the scale of the productive capacities, these are the mean values of productive capacities. You can see the least developed countries on the bottom of the rank, way behind the other developing countries. What you see on the top in blue lines are developed countries, which are actually, not surprisingly again, are the top performers on the scale. Now, within the LDCs, what you see here in the red is countries that are graduated LDCs, those that have graduated before, and the blue color are those that are recommended to graduate. You will see in the gray line developing countries or other developing countries, as we call them. And in the bottom, you can see the configuration of the rest of LDC. Means this is the home take for you here, is that even those graduated countries are still lagging behind other developing countries in transforming the productive capacities, which means, again, in defining what we call the international support measures and the smooth transition for graduating countries would mean that countries should take longer term perspective, not a short-term scenarios or 3 years, because in 3 years, there is no nation that would be able to foster productive capacities and kickstart the structural transformation of its economies. Now, within of the 8 categories, the LDCs perform only better than the rest of the developing world or the rest of the economies only in one of the categories. This is natural capital. what you see on the left-hand side panel in yellow is the LDC's performance on natural capital, which you can see is much higher than the developing countries, much higher than the developed nations, a little lower than landlocked developing countries. But on the right-hand side, what you will see is how low LDC's human capital formation is, which means that the natural capital potential, the huge resources that LDCs and LLDCs possess, they are not captured in improving the school education system, the health system, healthcare facilities, and healthcare delivery to the society, where you find human capital is actually in sharp contrast to the wealth that the economies possess. So I'm done almost, Mr. Chairman. The only thing I will show you here is also when we advance for the notion of productive capacities is not for the sake of only for policies, as Paul was saying, it's also transform economies. What you see on the screen here is the regression between the GDP per capita and the productive capacities of nations. On the bottom, the yellow lines are where you find LDCs, which is the lowest configuration of the productive capacities, which means low productive capacities and very low GDP per capita. Now, not only with GDP, the same happens with the Human Development Index of nations. Most of our LDCs are on the bottom of the rank on the figure that you see, where there is very strong correlation between the productive capacities and the Human Development Index, and are the same for productive capacity. Now, what are we saying? The implications, the conclusions of what I was saying is, of course, despite the massive natural capital they have, despite the international support that LDCs have enjoyed, they lag behind other developing countries in 7 of the 8 categories of productive capacities. Shockingly, the gap is huge in human capital, in infrastructure such as energy and transport, in ICT, structural change and institutions. These are the enablers and drivers of any economy you think of. Even the graduated LDCs, although they have made steady progress over the years, still after 30 years, they are lagging behind other developing countries on Earth. What we have been saying is fostering productive capacities can take longer time frame for any nation than, for example, meeting the graduation criteria. This will have a powerful message for LDCs, those that are in the process of graduation and those that are aspiring to graduate. Now, the low PCI means, in a nutshell, that existing structures, existing models of development have not worked for LDCs. There must be a change of the growth model. That's why we have been recommending for new generation policies, because business as usual is no longer an option. Therefore, productive capacity must be centered. This is a plea to you and to your development partners. Productive capacity must be placed at the center, as there was no nation that has ever developed without fostering productive capacities. The lag on the PCI of LDCs means their economies are vulnerable to all forms of shocks. The material extraction or the commodity-driven strategies, they fail to deliver promises, so that we have to change the status quo and the game that we have been playing if LDCs were to transform themselves. Thank you very much. I'm done. Thank you. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Musi, and thank you for being very brief. Certainly, we can take a lot of questions on this, and we have a lot more, could have shown a lot more, but I think this captures the spirit of it. And what I just wanted to emphasize before we go to my colleague Rolf Traeger is that this is a tool which helps analyze and helps the country understand where it is. There's need for more targeted and clinical policy development and a new generations of policies to move these things forward. Let me go straight now to Rolf Traeger. Please go ahead, Rolf. You have the floor. You're on mute, Rolf. You're on mute. Unmute. You're still on mute. Unmute.
Rostan should open for him. It's difficult to open from his screen.
You are still okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. Sorry for that. I will, given what has been already said so far, I will present the main policy recommendations which UNCTAD has put forward in the most recent least developed countries report. Before I get to the policy recommendations, I want just to show you some of the consequences of the very weak development of productive capacities in the LDCs, which we have been presented with in my colleague's presentation. The most serious impact of COVID on LDCs has not been in terms of health, but in terms of the economic and social crisis. And for this reason, these countries will have their worst economic performance, or they had their worst economic performance in 2020. It was the worst over the last 30 years. But I mean, the foundation of this, the deeper root causes of this is exactly the low level of development of productive capacities and the only initial stages of structural transformation achieved by these countries. And here in this chart, you can see the GNI per capita, the gross national income per capita of the LDCs in yellow and of other developing countries in brown. And what you can see is that back in 1970, more or less when the LDC category was established, the other developing countries, the level of their GNI per capita was just was less than twice as high as that of the LDCs. But now, when we look at the most recent data, what you can see is that the level of GNI per capita of other developing countries is 6 times higher than that of LDCs, which means that because of the low level of productive capacities development, because of the only initial stages of structural transformation achieved by LDCs, they have been diverging in terms of income from the other developing countries. So given this, what are the main policy recommendations which are put forward by the report? First of all, in the very short term, of course, it's necessary for these countries to enact counter-cyclical policies which aim to sustain the level of income of citizens, sustain the level of activity of the firms and farms of LDCs to the extent possible. And LDCs have taken many measures in this sense, but of course, this is limited, this is constrained by their limited fiscal space. Second, looking towards the middle to long term, it's absolutely crucial that LDCs embark on a very strong investment push, aiming exactly to modernize their economies, to bring about this famous structural transformation, to go from low productivity activities to long productivity activities. For this, it's necessary, first of all, to invest on the long-standing infrastructural gaps in terms of electricity, in terms of transport, in terms of ICT, of telecommunications. It's also very important, not this investment push, not just in order to redress the infrastructure problems, but also to create employment. We know that the LDCs need to create more than 13 million new jobs every single year just to absorb their growing youth labor force into which is disembarking onto the labor market. But of course, this investment push requires financing. Hence, the importance of financing for development to be addressed in the new plan of action, but also the issue of external indebtedness. That's why the report calls for debt cancellation, but also for a fresh SDR emission to create liquidity to finance this development push by the LDCs. And by the way, this is a proposal which was made by the Least Developed Countries Report 2020, and which was also mentioned by a group of ex-finance ministers and ex-central bankers of many developing countries, more than 30 of them, out of which 3 LDCs, which was published in an op-ed recently in the Financial Times, which means that these ideas, they are getting increasing traction. Going on in terms of policy recommendation, our report stresses the importance of STI, science, technology, and innovation policies. First of all, in order to strengthen and boost the technological capabilities of firms and farms without raising productivity and strengthening their technological capabilities, it won't be possible to develop productive capacities and reach structural transformation. Of course, the other side of it is the importance of the training of human resources, hence the importance of policies for education and training. And in terms of meso-level policies, it's absolutely crucial to adopt bold industrial and sectoral policies aimed at different sectors, manufacturing certainly, but also agriculture, which will promote domestic value addition and will deepen production linkages. I mean, they will result in the network of economic activity, of economic agents in LDCs becoming denser. Remember, production linkages is one of the 3 pillars of productive capacities. And I stress again the importance of industrial policies in order to reach a solid manufacturing basis, but which has spillover effects beyond manufacturing itself. Manufacturing has this capability of enticing technological progress also in other sectors and giving an incentive for the development of complementary skills by other sectors. This is the only way to reach sustainable industrialization, and it will also be a way of allowing the LDCs to have a meaningful engagement with advanced technologies, with the 4th industrial revolution, with digital technologies, the take-up of which is very, very incipient in LDCs. If you go beyond the take-up of mobile phones. In the productive sector, it has been very, very limited so far. And all of this shows the very important role that the state has to have in developing productive capacities as a coordinator of different economic agents, as a rule setter, as an agent which puts forward regulatory frameworks, etc., but also as an investor, hence, again, as one of the important agents of the investment push, which I mentioned earlier. And what has been the impact of international support measures which have been put in place over the last 50 years in favor of LDCs? Well, what we see is that so far they have had the very modest impact, and this is what explains the divergence in income between LDCs and other developing countries. So this points to the need for a new generation of new and more effective international support measures in different fields, in different domains, and we would like to draw the attention to the importance of devising new international support measures that result in the strengthening of the technological capabilities of LDC enterprises. This will be the only way of narrowing the existing very wide, very large digital gap between LDCs and other developing countries, not to mention between LDCs and developed countries. And it's important that the international community implements these new global partnership in support of LDCs. And this is a plea that goes beyond the commitment to leave no one behind, which is already there in the 2030 agenda, in the SDGs. But the international community needs to think that strengthening the support to LDCs is an investment in systemic resilience. So all the international community wins by strengthening the socioeconomic performance of LDCs. Otherwise, they can potentially become even more of a source of crisis than they are at present. And of course, the occasion which the international community has to show its commitment towards LDCs is, first of all, LDC 5, and we are now embarking on the accelerated preparation of this conference. And of course, UNCTAD stands ready to back the LDCs, to accompany the LDCs in this process leading towards the conference within 1 year's time. And I thank you very much for your attention, and I stop here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Rolf. Thank you very much indeed. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Chantaline, who will moderate the session. Chantaline, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you, Musi and Rolf, for the introduction to the PCI and the policy recommendation from our latest least developed country report. The floor is open for question, comments. So I suggest you put your an up or you put a note in the chat box to make it easier, so that we can make it easier to figure out who is asking for the floor. Or this
Chantal, thank you so much. Can I start?
Ambassador, of course. With pleasure.
Yeah, let me start by thanking all for the brilliant presentations. Very convincing, even for the doubting Thomases. When you see the correlation between the low PCI and the GDP growth and everything, it's very convincing, even for one who doesn't understand much about economics. This is a convincing presentation, which I hope you will take to Malawi and other meetings that we have before Doha. And the recommendations all point to the need for increased assistance to LDCs. My question is, you have said it, and I agree with you, that building capacities, productive capacities, is a long-term endeavor. Now we are going to come up with a 10-year program to 2030. First of all, how long is long-term? And does it fit into the 10 years that we are remaining with before 2030, in which case is there a possibility of enhancing or building the capacities faster than otherwise would be, so that we fit in everything within the 10 years we are remaining with? I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. If it's okay with my colleague, I would like to take 3 questions and then come back to you. So I have Bangladesh and then Ethiopia. And actually, Ethiopia was first. No, Bangladesh was first. Apologies. So colleagues from Bangladesh, you have the floor.
I thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. And we greatly appreciate UNCTAD's initiative to hold today's briefing on productive capacity building, which is very important for us. And we regret that Her Excellency Ambassador Rabah Fatima, Permanent Representative of Bangladesh to the UN and the co-chair of the LDC PrepCom, could not participate in today's meeting. Let me also take this opportunity to thank Paul Acumen, Director LDC UNCTAD, for his insightful comments, and I also thank Mr. Nuzi and Mr. Rolf for their comprehensive presentations. I would be very brief, and I would particularly focus on the relevance of productive capacity within the broader context of LDC 5 conference, because I think the discussions that we are having has a correlation with the undertakings that we anticipate or envisage for the LDC 5 conference. Now, we have just started the process leading to the LDC 5 conference in Doha in January 2022. And we all know about its broad mandate, which includes, among other things, lessons learned from the IPOA, sharing best practices for tackling pressing challenges by the LDCs, overcoming new and emerging challenges, and of course, building reinvigorated global partnership for sustainable development in the LDCs. And within this broader mandate, of course, the productive capacity issue fits quite well. We had our organizational session meeting, as you all know, on 8th of February 2021, and we are happy to see a high level of participation from member states, major groups, and different UN agencies at that session. As co-chairs, the permanent representatives of Bangladesh and Canada are now considering all the substantive inputs coming from different stakeholders with an open mind, and that, of course, include UNCTAD's inputs on productive capacity. And prima facie, it appears that a common theme resonated overwhelmingly in the meeting, and that was about the immediate needs of the LDCs to address the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic and build back better, smarter, and more resilient against further shocks and crises. And within that, that frame also, we attach high importance to the issue of productive capacity. In fact, my own country, Bangladesh, which is now on graduation track, depend highly on enhanced productive capacity to graduate with momentum. And I thank the presenters to bring that issue also in their presentation, the graduation and the linkages of productive capacity. We value UNCTAD's contributions to advance this issue further, and we have taken note of its launch of the Index on Productive Capacity Building. We see its value in coming up with a comparative framework of productive capacity, and I agree fully with the comments of LDC Chair on the correlation between low productive capacity and GDP growth rate. As much as the analytical framework is data and evidence-based, of course, that would be helpful for the framework, helpful for the member states to find it useful to tailor appropriate policies to mitigate the gaps in productive capacity. And in IPOA also, this issue was featured very prominently. However, We are right at this moment at a very early stage of the process, and it is difficult at this moment to identify any issue as the key priority of the conference. G77, LDC group, and other important groups and member states have outlined their priorities in the meeting of the organizational session, which the co-chairs have taken note of. The preparatory meetings will have the opportunity to delve deeper into the issues in the lead up to Doha. We also have two important regional meetings to be held in Malawi and Dhaka. The PGA and PECOSOC have also decided to convene a joint meeting in June to discuss the priorities for LDC 5. The outcome of all these meetings are expected to form a very good basis for the program of action to be adopted by the LDC 5 conference. The co-chairs believe that the priorities and key focus of the LDC 5 program of action will evolve through the intergovernmental process on the road to Doha. The inputs received from groups of countries, member states, and UN agencies will be the determining factors. At the end, the collective decision of the member states will dictate the course in this regard. The co-chairs will follow a transparent, participatory, and inclusive process. I would stop here. I thank you once again for hosting this event today.
Thank you, Neil, for your very pertinent comments. I know it's 11 o'clock already, but if I could ask people to indulge, we'll ask Ethiopia to ask his question as quick as possible, if possible, Disalam, and then go back to our colleagues for answer. So Ethiopia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chantaline, and thank you, our UNCTAD colleagues in New York for convening this meeting. And thank you also our colleagues from Geneva, Paul, Muse, and Rolf for the excellent presentation. It is always a pleasure to hear UNCTAD's presentation and to hear your perspective. And apologies, my PR was not able to make it in this meeting. We value the work of UNCTAD very much, and definitely this is not going to be the last meeting in the form of UNCTAD contributing to the LDC process. We'll have additional opportunities to interact. Just briefly on the need to shift the focus from the traditional model of supporting LDCs to help them graduate from the LDC category. It has been slow. Only a significant number of countries has graduated until now. The majority LDCs staying within the LDC category for quite some time, and definitely from the overall perspective of the report, to my liking, the need for shifting the focus from the old method of delivering support to a new perspective of focusing on ensuring structural transformation and addressing the productive capacity is self-evident, and the upcoming LDC 5 would be an opportune moment. And on the aspects that has been specified, particularly on the 8 components of the PCI, especially the pandemic, apart its one of its components in its impact on the multi-dimensional impact of the pandemic is it is affecting those already achieved aspects, particularly on human capital, energy, infrastructure. Those are elements that are going to be definitely impacted due to the fact that those LDCs have very scarce resources, and sources they are going to allocate for the development of infrastructure, which are infrastructure, human development, particularly education and the health sector, and other aspects are going to be severely constrained. and this calls for definitely a prioritized support in those areas. And as a last point, the report emphasizes, I'm not trying to be an additional presenter here, but the report to our liking has addressed the need for taking into account the specificities and the specific circumstance of a particular LDC, a general way of looking at providing support to LDCs in such a way that this is what will work for every LDC. But the report has perfectly addressed the need that each LDC has a different comparative advantage, and we are looking forward in such a way that the upcoming LDC 5 would incorporate most of the elements that the report has come up with to focus on the priorities that will deliver on sustainable development, addressing the supply side constraint, and investing on the components that are important, that will ensure structural transformation for us back home. The addressing supply side constraint, investing on infrastructure, and on human capacity, particularly on education, social safety, in part of our vocabulary, but we haven't that much achieved in ensuring structural transformation. But we will be engaged on the work of UNCTAD, and we are looking forward in the upcoming process. Thank you, Madam Shantali.
Thank you, Salem. If I don't see anybody else in the chat, so I will go back to our colleagues. Yeah. So Paul, should I start with you, or should I?
Please do. Yes. Let me give you a broad answer, and then we can go to the specificities later on. But I'd like to thank those distinguished delegates for raising those issues. I think they're most pertinent, and these are the issues we should be dwelling on and thinking about. I think one of the things my colleague mentioned is that we cannot continue with business as usual. And I would add, we cannot continue as business as usual and expect different results. As I mentioned to you, there is a need for a paradigm shift in the way we work and the way we organize ourselves. As there was a paradigm shift in the way we move from the MDGs to the SDGs. The MDGs were sectoral. The SDGs became interconnected, cross-cutting in nature, and that is why we said we need to move there. Similarly to the IPOA, the last IPOA, productive capacities was one of the other 7 priorities mentioned. The fact here is that productive capacity embraces all those issues that were identified as priorities. Was it infrastructure, it was agriculture, and on and on and on, financing. But that is what productive capacity is. But they must be interlinked in order for them to work. A simple example is that you cannot boost entrepreneurship and policies for entrepreneurship if you don't have the right policies for ITC development in the country. And if you have the right ITC policies for the country, but you don't have the right policies for energy, ITC cannot run without energy. So this is why the productive capacity framework is creating a basis from which to work and create these interlinkages. I'd also say that it offers an opportunity, as one of the distinguished delegates of Ethiopia said, which offers the opportunity for countries that it becomes country specific. It's not a straitjacket solution. It allows for countries to look at the needs of the countries, the comparative advantage of the countries, and the condition of the countries to be able to absorb these new technologies or whatever. So each development strategy will be different based on the countries, and linking it to the vulnerability profiles. That the vulnerability, and in fact, the Committee on Development Policy are undertaking now, which is the vulnerability profiles they look at and the impact assessment. This is all connected as well. What are the vulnerabilities of the countries? What do we need to do to change this? And we're all coming to the same conclusion that we cannot go on as business as usual. It cannot be a list of priority areas without having a framework like we did for the SDGs. And lastly, I'd say for distinguished ambassador, it is important that we build back better and we build back smarter and we build better resilience. But this has to be done within a framework. And 10 years till the 2030 agenda is concluded, you may have heard from many of our reports and many of people who have been saying in the past, is that the way we are heading now, it is unlikely that we're going to achieve those challenges and those aspirations. But the fact is we have to be bold enough to make that paradigm shift, to correct the course, so that perhaps it might not be done in 10 years, but we are in the right track to try and achieve these goals and aspirations of these countries. So that's just a broad answer to some of the issues that have been brought up. And I think my two colleagues would probably like to say something more specific. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. And indeed, having the economic dimension is extremely important. In the past, we tended to forget that. Let's go to Musi. Maybe we're going to the same order that you presented.
Yes, thank you, Chantaline. Just briefly, just to add to a point to what the director has already mentioned in responding to the distinguished ambassador's comment. Productive capacities, when we say this is not something that can be built overnight, we are saying that it requires policies, the right sort of policies domestically, and scaled up global partnerships. So this is not in a nutshell. We will be, or we have been putting only squarely on LDCs. But in terms of his precise question, how long is the long run, we can only tell you the experience that we have gathered from countries. As you know, Botswana graduated in 1994. Now Botswana is just reaching the level, the score of the average for developing countries in terms of its productive capacity formation, which is encouraging for all of us because Botswana graduated but never regressed. But due to its endowments and specific commodities in which it has a niche and comparative advantages, it sustained fostering productive capacities. But still, even Botswana is struggling to achieve higher form of structural transformation, although its productive capacities is elevated a little bit. But when you see the transformation of the economies, still Botswana's more than 90% of export is derived from diamonds, and close to 90% of government budgets comes only from one sector. So it's built institutions, it has the right policies, but still the functioning and the role of the private sector is not really that high, and it's not taking the availability of vibrant institutions. What I was saying is, if the policy countries keep augmenting their productive capacities over the years in a sustainable way, but it requires also global partnership. There are countries from other regions. If you see Chile, for example, in the 1990s, Chile's GDP per capita was actually in the low income category. But today, Chile is one of the highest income category in the Latin American region. There are countries such as Vietnam that were on the same footing in the 1980s and 1990s with most African countries. Today, they manage to transform their economies. They harness the global opportunities and make good use of the resources that they are endowed with. So it all depends on country circumstances, the policies and institutions, but also the kind of strategies that the countries put in place. I would say the next 10 years for countries with the right policies, we can scale up the productive capacities, even though it will be difficult to transform entirely the whole economy-wide productive capacities, as it was said. I totally agree with the comment from Bangladesh. Bangladesh's focus now and henceforth should be on fostering productive capacities and transforming the economy. the entire economy. They are in the right direction. Bangladesh has evolved hugely over the years, the index on the score, but it is important now for the coming policies would continue sustaining such a progress in the future as well. With regard to Ethiopia, yes, the 8 categories, this will be realigned with countries' endowments and also binding constraints on their development at the country. So these are not generic productive capacities. What we can provide you is elements or building blocks for the productive capacity framework. But these have to be realigned with country-specific circumstances. I will stop here. Maybe Rolf might have more to say. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Musi. And I remind everyone, we sent the link to this productive capacity. You can play with it online and get your productive capacity with the 8 pillars. So, Rolf, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Chantaline, and thank the distinguished country representatives for their remarks, which are extremely pertinent. And I'll just like to add to what my colleagues have just said concerning this question of the short, the medium term, and the long term, and how long is long. The fact is that as time goes by, the short becomes medium, and later the medium term becomes a long term. And the point where, I mean, this of course is obvious, but the important lesson of this is the policy coherence. So right now the house is burning in the sense that LDCs have been hit very hard by the COVID crisis, and there's an urgent need to recover the level of economic activity, exports, employment, GDP, earnings of the population, etc. And this is obvious. But there are ways and ways to do this. There are ways and ways, there are different types of counter-cyclical measures. And here it's very important when these measures are being taken and implemented to create a synergy between the short-term counter-cyclical measures and the national development plans, which typically point to the national development objectives over the next 3, 5 to 10 years. And there needs to be a coherence. And just to give you an example, for instance, all the needs which appeared because of the pandemic in terms of PPE, personal protective equipment, in terms of medical equipment, in terms of vaccines, etc., etc. There's a desperate need to import, etc. But very few countries have thought of trying to solve the question by developing their own productive capacities in these fields, whether it is for the production of masks, of personal productive equipment, and why not vaccines themselves. So this is just one example how national authorities can put together short-term policies with medium to long-term development objectives. And in fact, what we have seen is that those LDCs which have been best prepared to weather the effects of the pandemic have been those which had previously developed most productive capacities, because they could repurpose, for instance, textile manufacturing capacity to produce PPEs, to produce face masks, or chemical industry to produce hand sanitizers, etc. So these are just a couple of examples how having these long-term objective of developing productive capacities in mind for the short term will put these 2 different time horizons in harmony, and one will flow into the other. And as Paula Kuyumi, the director, said, it's important to get the direction right, and this has to be done immediately, but also it's very important to get the rhythm right, because the rhythm, there has been some development of productive capacities, there has been some structural transformation in LDCs, but it has been way, way too slow. So yes, it's very important to get the direction right, but it's also very important to very, very strongly and very quickly accelerate the pace of these transformations. Otherwise, the long run will be just too far away for our generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I'm not seeing any more questions or comments. So Paul, I would like to pass on the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Chantaline. Ambassador, would you like to say a few words before we close the session? If not,
Yes.
yes, please.
Yes, just briefly to thank you, Paul, and the whole team for this presentation. I will say this without fear of contradiction, that UNCTAD is our most, one of our most supportive agencies in the UN. And we really appreciate that. You will be, and you are already, a partner we are relying on in helping us to come up with this LDC 5 document. So it's just to encourage you that the work you are doing is very, very important for all of us. And that wherever possible, I have personally received the documents Chantal and you, Paul, have sent, but that these would be made available to country members who may wish. I know they are downloadable from your site, and I hope everybody is aware of that. So mine is really to thank you and your team for this occasion and for all the work that you are doing for LDCs and all vulnerable countries. Thank you.
Thank you. This means a lot to us, and I'd like to thank you and all member states for allowing us to be part of this discussion and allowing us to brief you with information and the research and analysis that we have done. We take this subject very seriously. As I mentioned to you earlier on, UNCTAD is the only UN organization that has a standing report on dedication to LDCs. And we will continue to do that. We have more products coming out, more information, and we're ready to assist any member states in understanding issues and providing information to any member states. Lastly, I'd like to thank my colleagues very much, Rolf Treger, Musi Delaleng, and Chantaline, for all the work they've done, and for those behind the scene, which you don't see, who have also been spending a lot of time trying to get this organized. And we hope that we can continue to have this dialogue, and we hope that you will be in touch with us with any information that you would want or require, so that we can help you go through this process with you, and that we can have a forward-looking LDC5 document outcome, which is not business as usual, and which will certainly transform the economies of your country. So I thank you very much, and have a good morning, afternoon, and we will see each other soon. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for attending. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
Bye.
We're just a phone call away.
Thank you. Thank you.